Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. Well, just talk a little bit about the campaign we're doing on campus. We're doing a campaign called Get Out the Vote. The main reason is we want to encourage our fellow peers to vote. We believe that voting is really important. Young people now, we encompass the largest voting bloc in Canada. It's really important that we go out there and we vote and we have our say. Would you like to introduce yourself as well as what riding you're in?
Excellent. All right, over to me. So my name's Ohana, and I'm running in Fleetwood-Port Kells, which is in Surrey. And I'm a high school educator, anti-oppression educator, award-winning. They told me to say that. But actually what it is that I've built programming, and I work with students outside of the classroom, really, right? To really build up their sense of civic responsibility, to fight for human rights across the board, and really to be that strong voice for people that feel left out. So that's the reason I'm running. I feel that voice is missing in Ottawa, and I look forward to really bringing forward the concerns of Fleetwood-Port Kells residents, and to really put forward a more ethical vision for Canada, a more green vision for Canada, and a better future for students, because they're not just the future, they're the today, and we don't see them being represented as well in our federal offices.
Ditto what she said, except my name is Sarjit Saran. I'm running in Surrey Centre, and my background is human resources. So I've done a lot of volunteer work as just run-of-the-mill volunteer. I've done it for different, like Cancer Society, Heartstroke Foundation of British Columbia, United Way. So I've done a lot of different type of work like that. But my profession has been human resources. I've gone right from a clerk all the way up to a director level. So I've worked in recruiting, labor relations, so a lot of that type of experience. So my reason for running is largely based on seeing people's wages, hearing people's concerns, having those real life stories in my office, sharing those experiences. I realized that we're not down the right path anymore. I'm not saying that we were on a good path, but the path has gotten really bad. And so people like Annie and myself were running because we're motivated. We're motivated to make a difference in Canadians' lives. And so I thought enough's enough. I can't blame anyone if I'm not willing to participate. So I decided to put my hand up and I said, I want to make change. So I'm here.
Okay, right off to the first question. You answered it a little bit, so did you, but why are you folks running for office? You can go a little bit more into detail.
Absolutely.
So I was in a debate earlier, so let me kind of pick that answer from there. I see a real commodification of human rights. So what I mean by that is that when you're talking about housing, which is a human right, when you're talking about our natural resources, when you're talking about, freedom of expression even, we're seeing that becoming a game. And more people are left outside that game, to include hardworking, working class Canadians, students, all types of people that, back in the day, you could definitely find yourself in a more stable, secure position. And now what really defines my generation and generations younger, and maybe even older generations for that matter, is precariousness. So I've become sick of that. And it's not enough to go, well, you don't have, you're too young, you don't have the experience, right? I was like, no, I have the experience, right? I see it every day, and why not put my hat into the ring and really try to change the game at that substantial level, structural level, where you don't just blame the individual, but you actually look at how we can change things at that higher level, and that's why I use that term, right? The commodification of human rights, because those are things that are not controllable by one person alone.
For me, the big issue is accessibility. When you have a government that promised so much. So 4 years ago, this government came into play and said, you know what, vote for us, because if you don't, it's going to be bad. So they played on people's feeling of insecurity, and they took advantage of that. In 4 years, they haven't delivered on their own promises, and they've had a challenge delivering on a Conservative Party's promises from a prior government. So this has scared me. I feel I'm living in a comfortable position in my life, but what concerns me the most is that the average Canadian doesn't have a Canadian dream anymore. And so when I see people that are out on the street, I see people that can't afford medication, I see people spending significant amount of their checks on transportation or on communication, where they're going to school and they're not getting into their classes because there's no spaces. Those are real issues. And those are going to be economic issues that are going to make a significant negative impact on society. So for me, running for this party simply means getting out there and making the grassroots changes that need to happen in the foundation so that Canadians can have and live their dream again, which is to be able to get their education, get a good career, own a home, be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, which is not going to happen under the existing government. So that's what got me motivated, got me out there, and I said, hey, enough's enough. The MP in my riding has tinted windows that reflect, has a locking door and a phone system that seems to never answer. When you pay that kind of money for an MP, you want accessibility. You have someone in your riding that's supposed to be there to help bring everyone together at different levels of government. It's not happening. And so I want to change that. Canadians deserve better. And I'm hoping, as a Canadian, working class Canadian, I'll be able to bring that change.
Well, thank you. Moving on to the next question. What will your party do to make post-secondary more affordable for students?
Well, let's start with the big one, right? What about stopping exploiting students and charging them interest on their loans, right? They're working hard, they're taking the opportunities provided them to go to school, and the second that you need a little bit of help, you're not really giving it, right? And so to me, number one is to get rid of those student interests, and our long-term goal actually is to go towards no more loans and more to grants, and eventually even free post-secondary education, which we see happening in various parts of the world. This is not an unachievable dream. It's something that is possible. So it's multi-layered in that sense. I would also say that, and in contrast to what the Conservatives are offering, what the Liberals are offering, and almost like, oh, don't worry, don't pay about it now, pay it later. That's not an answer, right? Actually, I see friends in the States that are really struggling with that reality, where they think they're in the clear, then all of a sudden those bills start coming in and they find themselves in a worse situation. So we have to make education more affordable, and to the point that it's not a burden. Education is seen as a step up, not a step down.
Affordability comes into play too. So on top of tuition and the interest that the government has collected, I think about $3 billion since they come into power. That's a lot of money. And if you look at our Medicare platform or prescription pharmaceutical platform, that would pay for almost the entire program, right? A significant portion of the program. So you have this, we care for students, now give me some more money, right? So there's something wrong there. Our platform also includes affordability on the aspect of bills. We're not talking about taking more tax dollars. We're saying your cell phone company's charging too much. We're going to do what other countries have done. We're going to cap how much they can charge you for these services. Internet. How does it go from $25 a month to $100+ a month? It's a lot of money. We want to put a cap on that because we think that internet and accessibility information is right. So when you take those two alone, look how much money you're putting back in your pocket. If you're living you're living in a basement suite or a rental suite, and your rent in this area alone has almost doubled in the last 5 years, you got your cell phone bill being capped, you got your internet being capped. We're putting money where it counts. We're not promising you back-end tax incentives. We're saying they're charging you too much, and we're actually going to step in and put an end to that. So that's putting money right back in your pocket. So no interest loans towards grants, like Danny said, but also the other everyday costs that people like you and I experience, which has gone ridiculously out of control.
Moving on to the following question. What do you think are the biggest issues facing students today?
So I'm a high school educator, and actually even today I ran into some students that are currently at KPU. So a lot of them keep in touch with me, right, which is awesome. I love it. But those conversations aren't always positive ones. I think affordability of housing is a major one I continue to hear. So sometimes they stay at home, but have these insanely long commutes, right, to UBC or other campuses. I do think that mental health is also a major issue. They're facing lots of pressures, right? Some of them are working full-time and going to school full-time, and mental health is left in the back seat. And I've seen students that went from straight A's to literally dropping out of school because there weren't the mental health supports that are there. And I think there's that precariousness of what's ahead. What's going to happen in the future, right? And that's just them picking up on the vibes that are very real that they see in their own families that are struggling to pay bills. So it's sad to think that our most, we assume it's the best and the brightest, right? That attend post-secondary, that somehow they're feeling left out, that they're feeling like they're being taken advantage of, and when they look around, they don't see a lot of people thinking about their issues. It's interesting that in terms of Fleetwood-Port Kells, but also other places, I'm one of the few people, and Sarj does talk about this, where I bring up student issues. Sometimes it's just thrown away as if, they're not there yet, they're fine. They're not fine, and I have the emails to prove it.
That's a great point. I've worked in companies where there's a lot of youth employees, and with that, they're working full-time, like Annie said, they're going to school full-time. And the other part of that formula is the affordability on their home life. So whether they're living at home to save that few dollars, or whether they're living outside of the house, for school, what we're finding is the uncertainty of housing is a big issue. When rents have doubled, when housing prices have gone up 88% in the last 4 or 5 years, people are worried. If they're not worried for themselves, they're worried for their parents, right? So it's almost a constant pressure that's on their head going, I need to perform, I need to get my classes, I need to get done, I need to go to work. What are my parents going to do? What are my siblings going to do? There's way too much pressure. And that pressure leads to a lot of other problems being addiction issues, alcoholism, absenteeism, dropping out. The perpetual wheel gets created through that type of experience. So, and he's hit it right. Like, there's not much more that I can say to you that explains that there is a huge interlocking issues that are at play here. And so that's where we as a party look at it as from a total solution. Look at every aspect of everyone's life. No matter what chapter of your life, we've built solutions that make sense. And so we're looking after from children with daycare, providing childcare, all the way to seniors in retirement. These put policies that help Canadians succeed their potential and get where they need to go so they can contribute to society and be proud of being Canadian again.
Thank you. What would your party do to address some of the concerns that international students are facing?
I guess I have a pretty blunt point on that one. This is not an us versus them situation. And I think that's kind of the narrative that's out there, right? Well, the international students are taking all the spots. I don't think that's true. I look at it more structurally. Are we, as a Canadian government, providing enough spots for all students? The reality is we have a huge shortage of skilled workers. And so immigration and international students are very much a vital resource that we need. That being said, when it comes to Canadian students that are perhaps struggling to get into the school of their choice, they're now looking at the fact of like, well, is there a seat for me, right? I'm part of the workforce too, right? But at the end of the day, we as the NDP believe we need to provide more funding for post-secondary spaces. And within our green plan, the Green New Deal, to really think about ways that new resources, new technology, retraining, all these kind of interesting ways to kind of get into that next level job, that we need to invest in that as well. By investing in those structural issues, we will create the spaces for everybody. And in Surrey, we know international students are being exploited. That cannot be forgotten. Everybody deserves to be protected, and I think Canadian students do have it better in that sense, but I'm part of One Voice Canada, and we see too many students facing massive, whether it's rent, whether it's them being paid less than the average Canadian, all sorts of ways that they are being used. So I don't like to say that this is a competition. It's not a competition. It's that, again, we're individualizing a problem that really is about a lack of federal leadership.
And he hits it up. I go a little bit further on that conversation. I blame the institutions. I think ultimately when I went to university, there was issues back then. International students, they were taking 20 of the 30 spots, and I had problems getting registration. I was able to make it work. However, that's not the case today. I have nephews that are in this school actually that can only get one course in their second year because there's no spots for them. So this hits close to home. I think the institutions have done a really good job of making people fight with one another, create an issue of divisiveness. The reality is they do bring a lot of money in, and the work that international students are doing are jobs that Canadians aren't taking. I can tell you, I flipped burgers when I was in high school. None of my nephews do that. None of my nieces do that. There's a culture of, no, you focus on your studies, you don't need to work. Who's going to do those jobs? We all appreciate going up into any one of the coffee shops or the fast food joints, and they're all international students. The underground economy, the underground economy that's been created is these international students have been capped on their hours, so now they're working for under the table wages and so forth. That's where all this negativity is coming from. If you actually looked at how much money's funneling into these schools and where it's going, I have a hard time believing that we haven't been able to create more spots and we haven't been able to engage more qualified people to come and teach. So I'm a structure-based person. I look at foundations, I look at the inner workings of an organization, and I think there's a deeper rooted issue, but it's much easier to blame people outside of it versus the institutions that run it. So elected, I want to take on that project of going, where's this money going and what's changed, right? And that's a big issue.
All right, on to the next question. What would your party do if elected for mental health resources?
So we want to put in a mental health strategy across Canada, and that's under kind of our larger pharmacare and healthcare improvements right across the board. We see in BC, under the BC NDP and John Horgan, this new Ministry of Mental Health, and Judy Darcy and of course everybody else has been doing an incredible job at actually increasing access to resources, creating new resources, and even giving grants to local organizations like the South Asian Mental Health Ambassadors that Harman Pander and Kulvinder Shergill helped develop. Kulpreet Shergill helped develop. So these are incredible new innovations coming forward, but all of that is through funding from higher levels of government. So it needs to be at the forefront. A person that is not well cannot produce as much, cannot go to school. It definitely hurts our economic productivity, right? But that's not the answer, right? As a human being, we have to realize it is World Mental Health Day. I know we're getting close to the end of the day, but it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to have mental health issues. I think most of us, I have a family that does struggle with mental health issues. It's not about you're a problem, you're diseased, you're less than. It's not about that at all. It's about finding resiliency, finding ways to deal with these issues, but at the same time, there's anxiety and there's so much depression around things like affordable housing and being able to afford your daily life that as a federal government we can deal with. So we have a very comprehensive plan around really all of our policies being based on how do we reduce people's mental strain, bottom line, and then also funding those specific programs that can deal with different kinds of mental health issues.
Annie always handles it very well, but I'm going to throw in the business end of it for that. So I've set up a lot of benefit plans for companies, and I can tell you, the majority of plans do not actually include psychologists. And in fact, paramedicals are typically an add-on to a plan. And most plans that I've worked with in manufacturing, so we're talking middle industry, probably median, they're about $300 coverage. The average psychologist out here for 50 minutes is about $180. So your coverage is useless. When you're getting only 1.5 sessions, there's no way you're going to be able to work through any issue. So that's why the NDP takes a more proactive approach. It's looked at other governments in Europe and so forth and said, hey, if we look after this, just like any other thing that we have, whether it be an infection or a broken arm, when you look at it from that perspective, it's something we can treat, it's something that we can cure, it's something we can move past. It's a very different discussion. So I think that private industry was going to benefit from our practice because less lost times from days lost, so people aren't calling in sick, people are not going on short-term disability, because the treatment's available, the resources are available, they're affordable, they're reachable, and there's enough of them. And then we need to, again, go back to those schools. Are we having enough psychologists? Are we graduating enough social workers? Are we creating that opportunity? Because there is, we need them, but are we creating those spaces? And so that goes back to the institution analysis to go, are we supplying what we need?
And I just want to add one more thing. As a teacher, that was one of the first things when they stripped our collective agreements back in 2002 that we saw the firing of psychologists and counselors. Like some schools had none of that available. So we know that it can go there again. We've seen it before. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that never happens again.
Great, thank you. Can you talk about what your party plan is to tackle climate change?
How much time you got? Well, again, it goes back to the idea of Indigenous stewardship and actually human rights, right? So our air, our water, our land being considered as such. So what does that mean? In the precarious times we're in, where we're seeing the fact that we do have to lower our emissions, otherwise we can't reverse it, that we need to look at this much more as an existential threat, right? This isn't just about do we have the money, right? And Jagmeet Singh said it really well, Mr. Delay, Mr. Deny. And that really addresses that issue very well about which party will stand in terms of being able to have that forward thinking and that innovation. Bottom line, and I might take a little bit from you here, it makes business sense to move ahead with green technology. It makes sense to cut our fossil fuel subsidies to get, to just cut them to zero and actually reinvest that money elsewhere. And I've been talking to oil and gas workers, even people that work at the docks, and they say something very important. They have the skill sets. It is transferable to green technology. So instead of, a pipeline, a pipe dream really, based on a dying industry, why not reinvest those funds? It's going to be very beneficial to students wanting to get into those fields, but also it's going to save our planet. I want to raise one final point that when the conservatives say, well, Canada isn't really a major player. Absolutely we are. There's environmental racism behind our mining in Latin America, the extraction in Africa, around the world that Canada has played a role in because of Industrial Revolution and all kinds of revolutions. We can't just pretend like we're not a major player. We can be that innovator. And at the end of the day, it's a shifting of priorities. We don't have to choose the dirtiest form of economic production. We can move forward and actually use our natural resources that the Indigenous peoples always knew about to actually rebuild that stewardship model and really give us new life in Canada for a brighter, cleaner economy.
And he said it pretty much. I'll have to add to that, Annie. Very good job, thank you. I always tell people it's about opening another door before the other one slams shut. So the NDP has always taken a position of people matter, and so if you show them a ray of hope and you guide them towards something better, they want to do it. In simplest form, as I've used this example and over again, growing up I delivered newspapers. We used to throw them in the garbage because there was no recycling service at the house. Then finally, the small town, we got the communal recycling centers. So we took the papers and dropped them off. And then we had door-to-door service. NDP doesn't say, oh my God, world's coming to an end. We need to raise taxes. We're like, it's not looking good. We have to do something. Here's a plan. And everyone's part of the plan, from recycling your daily usage stuff to preventing certain manufacturing practices and introducing new technology. Jagmeet Singh has said it, it's using hope, getting everyone involved and getting buy-in. Social behavior, human behavior is not modified through taxes, it's not modified through forcing you, because you're not on board. But when you give people an incentive, when you engage them, when you give them an opportunity to participate, amazing things happen. Because you're part of the solution. People want to do the right thing. We're the party that shows you how you can be part of that right thing.
The next question. What do you intend to do to address housing issues such as affordability that students face? You want to start?
Yeah. So affordability. So I have a lot of experience with builders and so forth, and I can tell you from my own experience is that the biggest cost that faces housing for anyone out here is land value. The escalation of the land price. So when you look at the average per square foot cost of a wood structure build, it's not very pricey. It's still expensive, but it's not as pricey as the land. And I'm going to throw some numbers out there to put in perspective. A 6,000 square foot lot in Surrey in 1999 was $150,000 at the peak in a very nice neighborhood. That same 6,000 square foot lot sold for 1.4 million just this year alone. But the house structure is only about $400,000. So you have a decent sized house for $350,000, $400,000, $500,000. The reality is the biggest cost is land. When you look at the housing platform that we're running on, which is creating 500,000 affordable non-market housing, what you're looking at is taking out the land cost, which people are paying for land. We're a country with abundant land. And yes, we're trying to build up our city and our metro area, but when you take that portion out, you take that very expensive, now housing affordability is a reality. You can pay the rent. You can pay a monthly fee. You can actually buy it, right? And own something and say, hey, I have a mortgage on my 2-bedroom flat or my townhome or whatever it may look like, and you're actually going to be able to pay that off. So I think it's very important that housing is something that should be something that's obtainable. Just like coming to school. You should be able to graduate from high school, come to university or college, but I can get my degree, I can get my diploma, I can buy a house, I can get a job, I can stay within my community, I can have a family if I choose to, and I can live a good life. It's all part of that total solution that we're talking about. Housing affordability is key, because when you don't have a place to stay, or you don't feel some places home, it takes away from a major component of your life and who you are, right? It's that whole concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let's look at it. Housing is very, very much a foundation of who you are and who we are as people. A place where we can curl up and close our eyes and feel safe. And that's important to us as a country.
Yeah, I'll add just a little bit to that in terms of detail. The market, but also, and this might sound controversial, regular Canadians have failed students. because, and the reality is they're being squeezed. So they have a home, maybe they have a basement suite that they want to rent it out. And more it's just getting more and more expensive. And nobody's really realizing that a student at the start of their post-secondary career, even trades, whatever that might be, is not at the same position financially as someone who's been working for 10 years or 15 years, etc. And so really we've lost that sense of humanity of, well, someone needs a place to stay. And no, $1,500 a month does not cut it, right? When they're already paying tuition. So there's really real numbers at play, and we need to have that personal responsibility on that front, I think. Now, that's not the only answer though. So federally, the number he mentioned, 500,000 units, we want to bring we want to get the federal government back into the housing market. Again, let's really look at accountability and grading the market on what they've done. They failed, right? It's an F. So we want to go back in. You know, can we find federal lands that can be used? And also those really innovative solutions like co-op housing. There's some fascinating stuff in Scandinavia with the idea of, you know, with seniors isolation, maybe having post-secondary students living in senior citizen facilities, right? And helping find constructive solutions there. There's all sorts of mechanisms that we could be using that go beyond just the basement suite or the house or whatever people are looking at. But as long as the market just dictates everything, we're never going to be able to get there. So we want to invest in students. That's the bottom line. The market doesn't believe in that because you don't have enough, you know, capital for them, right? That shouldn't be the answer to housing. And you know, when you say housing is a human right, you take capital, you take money out of that equation. Bottom line, you're going to save money in the long run because those students will be able to save up money and then will be able to buy the housing in the marketplace. So again, long-term thinking, innovation, and the idea of, you know, if you save a little bit of money here and the federal government can help you with that, will that result down the line in more growth in terms of housing, etc.? And the answer is yes. It's not about, oh my God, we're going to spend the money up front. Not really. You're just setting up, you know, the ripe soil that's going to allow students to really flourish and become productive economic citizens.
On to the next question. Do you or your party intend to increase transfers to provinces for post-secondary education?
I think it's pretty much straight answer, which is yes, there has to be more investment. It goes back to the international student versus the domestic student conversation. Money does have to come into play, but we also have to look at where the money's going, right? Our party is very progressive. It's about being prudent with every tax dollar, but also making sure it creates enough opportunities. So the simple answer, yes. Longer answer is with some careful assessment to make sure it's being applied where it needs to be.
And if we don't do that, we're not going to see the growth we need in Canada. We're going to see people falling further behind. And then when we want to make the push in terms of new sectors and technology, we're not going to have the skill set. And I would argue we're already there, because that's why we're missing hundreds of thousands of workers around the country, is because there hasn't been enough investment here at home to actually make that happen.
All right. The second last question. What is your party's plan to improve transit and make it more accessible and reliable?
I'm going to let Andy start with that because I'm just going to be very negative because I've been actually, you know what? You can wrap it up with some nice words. So I'm really upset with this because I grew up, and so when I moved here from the Cowichan Valley, I lived in Fraser Heights. I used to take bus services every 2 hours. It was ridiculous, right? It used to take me 2.5 hours to get to Simon Fraser up in Burnaby. It was horrible. Like, I used to walk, a 9 p.m. bus service ended, I was walking across that overpass, and my parents were worried for me and so forth. So it's a lot of issues there. But what I find just as interesting is when the existing sitting MP in my riding tries to take credit for the work that other governments have done. And, you know, they're running radio ads. We brought in $1.6 billion towards this and that. It's actually $493 million. The $1.6 billion is a total investment through TransLink and the BC government being the largest contributor, and he's taking credit for it. And so that's why I said this could be a little negative, but I'm being honest about it, which is they're being deceptive. And that deception is taken away from what needs to be done, which is we need to expand our TransLink, our transit system. We need to, again, my view is to look at the organization. I love it when people in Surrey in particular, oh hey, they call us into meetings, do you support our plan? Will you bring money? But why is the money not landing here, right? So you got me advocating, you want me to advocate for you and sign some testimonial or something, but you're not bringing the money into my city. I love fighting with people like that. I'm like, so tell me what you're gonna do. Are you gonna tell everyone to vote for me so I can bring this money and it's gonna actually end up in Surrey? So Annie's gonna talk more about the investment, but what I'm telling voters to think about is a lot of the numbers out there are made up. really do your research. The amount of deception out there by parties, not our party, but the governing party, has been so severe that people actually are starting to believe it. It's not true. The federal government has not invested much. Most of the investment is still provincial. We are committed to a fund for metropolitan transit systems through a continued funding formula. But in particular, people like Annie and I running in Surrey are making sure the money gets here. Surrey needs it, Langley needs it, and I'm sick and tired of people trying to pretend they care about Surrey when they don't. And that's the truth.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to be negative too, actually, just a little bit here, because in Fleetwood-Port Kells it's a major issue. And actually, I know that I flipped over some votes because of this, so that's good for us, I guess, in a weird way. There's a couple main points here to be made very succinctly, hopefully. Number one is that 1.6 billion, even no matter where it's coming from, is not enough. So meeting with the Fleetwood Business Improvement Association, they're like, what's going on? We get like 4 or 5 stations max. It stops at like just the start of Fleetwood. It doesn't even go into, to Langley, let alone even deeper. So, and the fact that a lot of people were worried about SkyTrain and whether that was the best option, right? Without getting into that debate, but just that, people's voices were not being heard. So we get this $1.6 billion investment, but it really didn't end up where it needed to end. And people are now facing some pretty big changes in terms of the land base and how it's being used without any consultation as to how that would affect them. Number two, I think it is putting down Surrey when you suggest this idea, like, people need to get out of Surrey. I've never believed this. And from students, and upwards, we want to live and work and play in our communities. Without transit, you can't do that, right? And especially if we're getting all, green and going into the new technologies, no, we don't want people using their cars. We want them to be able to get around, the various city centers in Surrey and be able to find whatever resources or things they want to do. So there's a lack of understanding on that point. It's very an anti-Surrey bias that I find with governments, and the fact, and especially Fleetwood, it's a suburban area for the most part. There's some manufacturing, etc. And we're kind of like, oh wait, what? Like that's in Surrey? And so you're like, well, if you have that blind spot, how are you going to invest at all, right? And that last point, investment. Transportation will never do you wrong. I was in Europe not too long ago, and we stopped by Amsterdam, and they had multiple layers of transportation. Like everything you could think of, it was there in that city. And I just thought to myself, how could they do this and we can't? Like in Surrey, I know Canada's big, but let's just think Surrey. Why is it that Amsterdam can make this happen and we're still struggling just to get rapid buses, let alone LRT or SkyTrain or whatever the mode is chosen? So there was a real lack of consultation on that front, and we're just nowhere near what we need. And the NDP definitely want to put forward, and this is the last point, we want to put permanent funding in place, which is something that Translink is asking for. So instead of being project-based, where Surrey's always last. So, the Evergreen and, the things UBC and blah, 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 and all that's happening. But meanwhile, Surrey's just waiting and waiting and waiting, even though that, we were in a priority position. So by investing in like a permanent fund, it's easier to tap into the fund rather than just waiting for projects and either they don't get developed or they get half developed, which is the case in Surrey, Fleetwood-Port Kells.
Right on to the very last question. Will your party separate the grants for students with disabilities accessibility needs from student loans? Continuing to keep this trend together creates barriers for students with disabilities who have exhausted student loans or who do not qualify for student loans.
I do, I'm going to step into this one, just more relates to what I've studied and what I've worked with. I think that when it comes to accessibility and funding accessibility, there's a total solution. And we talked about, and governments have talked about it, parties talk about a one-check system. The one check being, whether it's provincial funding or federal funding or local funding, that everyone gets this one check, right? I really am a proponent, I really do support that ideology, which helps people ensure that their whatever funding or whatever the source of funding is, whether it be pension, whether it be disability check, or whether it be accessibility grants, that it all should be consolidated into a total solution. So specifically on the policy, I haven't seen anything specific to break it out, but we are very much committed to accessibility. And if you look at even our party, the way we do our events, so the way we hold our conference and so forth, much more consideration. We believe that bringing more people into the fold, having that diverse conversation includes everyone. And so when you empower people through creating those funding opportunities, bringing job opportunities like we've talked about, NDP has always promoted creating a job hub for federal government here, which I love the fact the Liberal Party lets you run with their idea. But that's something we've been pushing, going, as a party that represents working people, bring the hub here. Let's create opportunities and show even private industry how these people that have had accessibility issues can be contributing members through some amazing jobs and opportunities. I'll give you an example. One lady that came to my booth during the Pride event, I had a hard time understanding her. And she said, that's an example of what I go through. My hands are great, my mind's perfect, but I can't talk. And I thought to my mind, I'm like, she'd be a perfect person that would be putting together Canadian passports. Right? And I talked to her, I'm not saying that's her job, but in my mind, I'm like, I have a place for you. I have an opportunity for you. And you would probably be amazing at it, and you would do a great job, you would earn a good income, you would live locally, and you'd be proud every day going, I'm a contributing member of this society, and I'm making a difference. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because it's not a priority for this government, right? It's a dog and pony show. Let's smile, look pretty, and vote this. And if you don't vote for us, bad things are going to happen. But the reality, the people that suffer the most are the people that have the accessibility barriers. This province has an NDP government, which I'm very grateful for. One of the persons on our campaign, actually, has accessibility issues. She's in a motorized wheelchair. And she said to me, before the NDP government came into play, a repair of her tire would take 6 weeks. There was a time when she was bedridden for, I think, a month and a bit because they couldn't replace her tire. With the provincial NDP coming into play, they have now a loaner. You can get a loaner car for an oil change, but a person that's actually out there working that has a motorized wheelchair could not get a loaner. She now can get a loaner. It does take a while still to do a repair and the parts, and there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, but she's not missing time off of work. She's back in the labor market, she's moving, she's getting things done. That's what it means. When you genuinely value people, you will create solutions, you'll create formulas, you'll create systems to help them move. You keep them moving, make them feel cared for so they can be contributing members of society.
I'm going to challenge my own party on this one. I think if we don't do it, then we failed. Right? So Jagmeet has a delay and deny kind of thing, and I call it the blind brothers, because that's an area where ableism is a massive issue in our society in multiple levels. We know that people who are disabled face higher rates of poverty. They face higher rates of not being able to actually isolation, to being able to contribute to society, even though they can be some of the best and brightest in our world. So I think we do need to delink it, and I can almost assure you that it's in our platform, just not in that 160-page document that we have up right now. We do need to delink it because at the end of the day, accessibility is one of the ways to solve this intersectional oppression, where because someone, whether they're born with it or not, that's not the issue, right? But where you have those issues of accessibility, and yet you're still able to contribute. Why do we put up barriers? Government should not be putting up barriers, and the fact that the last 13 years, or even more than that, to be honest, that they haven't resolved that issue, that they can't see that. When I have friends that have been, talking about that for years now, right? They're seeing this ableism everywhere they go, and they don't see anybody offering solutions. I don't think you can be a strong federal government if you don't put people with issues around accessibility and ability in the forefront, because they are the ones suffering from the most oppression. And so we have to do that first. How easy would that be? And again, you're actually solving multiple problems at once, and in the long run, it'll be cheaper. And I think people will be more willing to contribute to society that actually accepts them, because they're just as human as anybody else.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time for being here today. The other candidates did kind of do a closing statement, so I just want to give you the same opportunity. It was very quick. It's just like, vote.
Yeah. Can I hold one of these?
I would prefer not to, because none of the other candidates touched it as well.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
But I can point to this.
Yeah, go ahead.
There we go. Okay, that works. Yes. I don't know. I got to think about it.
We actually do have this much fun.
I know.
The best part of the NDP when they recruit, it's amazing the process, their vetting process is amazing, but also the energy is so different. You can see it when we get together, we're hugging, we're high-fiving. It's just a different energy. I love it.
Yeah.
Like, if you can get along this well today, just imagine what we
You
can do
need that in Ottawa.
Yeah,
You need
absolutely.
it. Yeah, I'm going to stick to this message, really.
Okay.
I mean, I think I've talked enough. So my name's Annie Ohana, and I'm running for Surrey Fleetwood-Port Kells with the NDP. I think bottom line, when you step up to run for office, it's about democracy. It's about thinking you have something to offer, just strengthen it. And I'm just so happy that the numbers show that now the millennial generation as well as the younger generation now make up the biggest piece of the voting population. So stop believing that your voice doesn't matter. Stop letting people tell you that your voice doesn't matter because you're too young, you're still in school. I tell my high school students, it is now, right? You take action now. Your voice needs to be heard now. I'm so happy to see the Get Out the Vote campaign. And I encourage you, like, this is it. We're in an election where we're talking about climate emergency. We're talking about massive existential problems. We're talking about people that will never be able to afford a home if we continue down the path we are. You want to be revolutionary? You want to rebel? Now's the time to do it. So get out there and vote. And I hope that me and Sarge get your vote on October 21st.
I'm going to vote for her, but as rarely as I can because I'm voting for myself. I live in my right. Annie says it right. And one of a close friend said this to me. No matter what chapter of your life, we have solutions. Children's, from daycare to childcare, to students, forgiving interest, creating a grant system so you can actually focus and see a light at the end of the tunnel. Adults, creating a green industry, creating opportunities so you can stay local, you can be part of innovation, you can make a difference. And then seniors, making sure they get the right compensation when it comes to pensions, but also making sure that certain aspect of expensive, like cell phone bills, internet bills, pharmacare are all provided for. So we are the party that has always been there. From Tommy Douglas, from the introduction of Medicare in the Canadian society, to here in this province. We're different provincially, but the ideology is the same. And tomorrow, we want to be your voice. So all I say to people out there is vote strategically, and the strategic vote is orange. So vote NDP, myself, Sarjit Saran, Annie Ohana, Harjit Singh Gill, we have Steve Crozier in South Surrey. We're your team. We actually are a team. We want your vote so we can work for you. We're going to be your employees, and you're going to be proud of us. I guarantee it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.